Happy Friday. It's Friday with Fred. Hi, everyone. My name is Fred Faulkner, and I go by the moniker of According to Fred. Today is my recap episode of what I spent last week in Las Vegas with about 10,000 other people, including a bunch of colleagues of mine at Adobe Summit. So today I'm going to take a little bit of a rewind. What did I see? What did I hear? What did I not hear? And how I think Adobe's doing after coming out of Adobe Summit. Let's get into it. It's hard to believe that at this point last week, I was on a plane coming home or about landing after spending about 5 days in Las Vegas at the annual Adobe Summit. Adobe Summit is, I think, as I shared before, one of my favorite conferences of the year. I think because Adobe has a great set of products, not that there aren't other ones that are out there as well, but as a marketer, they really do check a lot of boxes when it comes to enterprise ability to deliver customer experiences at scale. I've been a person who has bought the product before. I've used the product in the past. I've implemented it for customers. So I am partial to it. I'm just going to say it out of the gate. I'm partial to what goes on with Adobe and how it works. But I do want to kind of come back. I do this annually. It's every year. So now let's talk about what did I see last week? What was I not hearing that I thought? And what did I find was fun to hear and just interact with. So I'm going to get into a little bit also what I predicted would happen and didn't happen or did happen. How good was I? But I think to start off with a couple things, if you are watching this live and you have the time, if you want to join the conversation, I will, if anyone wants to jump in, hit that link at the bottom. It should log you into the green room. And if you join in, we'll have a little bit of a back and forth. You can also comment and I'll bring them up and comments on screen and do some engagement is there as well. So go ahead and join in if you're available. Otherwise, no big deal, no harm, no foul. What was one of the first things I really enjoyed doing? I posted a couple things about Adobe Summit last week. The one that got the most engagement, which is not really surprising, but at the end of the day, as I mentioned, I think in the pre-Adobe Summit show, is that I've been in this business for 10 years with Adobe's ecosystem, and I have some great colleagues. And I think one of the best things was actually just seeing people I've worked with in the past. And getting to be with them back in person. And so this is a picture of back when I worked with a company called CityTech. We were an Adobe system integrator. We got bought by another company called ICF at the time. This is a small smattering. There's probably about 6, 7, 8 more people that could have been in this picture that was not at Adobe Summit. But this is great to be able to catch up with old friends, be able to see them interact, see how they're doing. We're all friendly competitors now to a certain degree, but it's always great to see faces and familiar faces, especially when you haven't seen them, you're not seeing them on a day-to-day basis. They're not in your Slack channels anymore. I would say got a great self-engagement on LinkedIn, but it is just, you're running around, but to grab a drink, to have some good laughs, to kind of hear how families are doing is always a great way to kick off and spend some time at Adobe Summit. So that was one of my favorite parts about the event in and of itself. But let's get into what did we hear. So opening day, the first session, the first general session is always about product announcements. And as I mentioned, I think as I mentioned before, I had some expectations of what I was going to hear. No surprise whatsoever. It was an AI roadshow. We heard a little bit about this last year. Adobe was late to the game with the whole generative AI announcements. In September of 2022, ChatGPT comes out. DALL-E is starting to make some noise. Midjourney, Adobe was quiet, not really making any announcements. And then at Adobe Summit 2023, which is about 4 or 5 months later, they announced Firefly, which was going to be ready in the summer, and then continue to advance. So no surprise that the AI theme and mantra was what we definitely heard at Adobe Summit. And Firefly was one of the major things that they talked about. So Firefly definitely got a lot of major upgrades Even before Adobe Summit, they had already announced and launched their Gen 2 model. They had some additional features if you were a paying subscriber to any of the Creative Cloud products. They baked it into Photoshop, into Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Express, which is their Canva competitor for marketing teams. It's starting to make its way in, and I think because Adobe is such a creative focus, right? Their whole kind of tagline is creativity for all. Putting it inside the Creative Cloud products first makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. And then how do they make that available in the Experience Cloud was where I think they really wanted to kind of showcase that a little bit more. And I wasn't surprised to hear that at all. In fact, they did some great demos. I'm going to actually show some of how Adobe Firefly's, done some things here in a second, but it was, the biggest things that they kind of really took away from that. We're going to get into Firefly in a second, but some of the other things that really jumped out at me at Adobe Summit was things like AI Assistant. How does marketers, there's Creative Cloud and there's Experience Cloud, and how does Experience Cloud enable marketers to do more? And having now this AI Assistant powered by Sensei, their other AI and legacy AI platform, is really kind of a showcase of where they're going to go. It's the co-pilot, if we can call a term that's more universal, a co-pilot for marketers. Really excited to see that announcement come out and how they kind of made that come to life. I'll show a little bit about that here in a second as well. Be able to talk about data and how we're going to be able to take more data into the Adobe Experience platforms and Experience Cloud and be able to do more with it for personalization was one of the avenues they talked about. Gen Studio was their AI platform that is really taking marketers and giving them, again, this co-pilot tool, but this whole workflow ability to create, deploy, optimize faster. And then, even talking to not just B2C customers, which is what a lot of Adobe's are, but also they announced Journey Optimizer for B2B, which is taking their whole B2B market more at scale. That's coming a little bit later. It's not out yet, but they did definitely talk about it. But I think the last theme that Adobe continues to do, and I talked about this earlier, is about just like this idea of compression, how they're going to be able to advance marketers to do more faster, reduce that timeline and the lag between data and the journeys and the orchestration and being able to deploy. These are really the big themes that they came out, AI, and then all these product announcements. It was really interesting to hear. I think every marketer can really get excited in the room. They are a suite of solutions. They are truly a suite of solutions that can take you from ideation to content creation, to deployment, to marketing optimization, and then actually understanding where your audiences are doing, and ideally provide growth for you as a company. So let's talk about some of those things specifically. And I'm going to have a few slides of some pictures that I took while I was there. So we're going to jump into, actually, we're going to go back to this one. And, I mentioned, let's start with Firefly. So Firefly announced two specific things in addition to the idea of just having more advancements. So custom models was an area that they announced, which is really giving the ability for marketers to incorporate their own brand standards, their own content, and have the model get trained, the Firefly tool get trained on your content. Super powerful for brands that need to create things at scale, super powerful for brands that want to be able to have more in control of what the Gen AI can be influenced on. And some of this is available in things like already to a certain degree inside Adobe Firefly with the idea of being to present a theme or some sort of style. But they announced this other thing called structure. And that was a really interesting aspect of being able to take generative AI and doing something more, allowing creatives to do more with it. So I'm going to actually show you guys a little bit of an example of how that works right here, because I can. I'm a paying subscriber of the Adobe Photoshop suite for photographers. So I have access to Photoshop and Lightroom, and that also gives me access to things like Adobe Express, but also Firefly as a paying customer as well. So taking this over really quickly, I created a prompt that just for as an example. So we're gonna just type in here, not the prompt that I thought I was gonna do. Give me 1 second here. It's gonna be this guy, and we're gonna put it here. So a house at the bottom of a mountain range next to a river, trees in the distance, and a night sky with a moon and stars. General prompt, we're going to try and see what happens and see what comes up with this. And we're going to let this thing fire off. And this is a little bit of a new interface for Adobe Firefly. They actually used to have a lot of these tools on the right hand side, but now they're really kind of bringing these things over to the left. So here we go. Some interesting. Now I didn't decide if it was gonna be artwork or if it was be photo driven. This is just a straight up, just a prompt just to see what it's gonna come up with. So yes, we have a moon, night sky, mountains, house, river, a couple different examples here. So we have two, we got three, we got four. These are, pretty nice looking photos on what we want to be able to incorporate and to be able to use. That's a good use of generative AI. Now, one of the things I could do right now is if I scroll down, I want to say, oh, look at this kind of pink hue to it. And this is a reference style. And there's a lot of other configurations you can go in here, which I think is actually one of the big advantages of Adobe's Firefly versus things like Dolly, where you'd have to really describe what you're trying to get to. The fact that these filters and colors and tones and lighting and camera angles are all built into the solution make it really powerful. But I'm just going to select this reference archetype, this reference style, just because I think it's actually kind of a cool aspect, and just click generate. So now this was available before. This was here before Adobe Summit. I can click the style. I can actually upload a style if I really wanted to, but it's going to give me as a creator a little more power to decide how that style gets applied. Think about brand style, brand tones, all that type of stuff that can kind of come into play. And here we got a few more images that have come into play. And again, nice, kind of still descriptive, using my style and tone, the style that I asked for in reference, and worked really well. Now, one of the things that's new, and this is the structure part that I'm going to scroll up to here, that I think is really fascinating. And this is where I've had some conversations with colleagues asking me about things like, hey, what do creatives now have to deal with generative AI? And is it going to take away from this idea of creativity for artists? And it's a really interesting question at the end of the day. And I think this next thing, what Adobe's doing, and this is again where I think it's super unique, is where Adobe's saying, I can still use and make creativity for all, and give creatives still the ability to use generative AI and still take their creativity and bring it to the table. And here's how they're doing it. So this is reference structure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload it. And so I just, because I'm a great artist, not so whatsoever, but I created this on a piece of paper earlier today. It's a moon, it's stars, it's got mountains, it's got a house, it's got a little river and trees. So it's really describing the prompt that I came up with in the beginning. And actually, you guys aren't seeing it at the moment. So I'm going to actually switch over to, it is, well, you'll see it here in a second. See if I can actually bring this up. This is where live becomes really interesting when you can't highlight the things you want to highlight from a tab perspective. I feel like you should be able to see this because I want to show it to you. I think it's interesting to kind of share exactly what we're seeing here. So I'm going to all right, here's my image. So here's the image that I drew. It describes the prompt. It's not super great. I'm not a great artist, but it gives you an idea because I can actually give, as a creator, I want to still be able to use tools to do what I want to do. And this is where I think the power of generative AI and creativity tools with a non-artist like myself can bring these things together. So I think creativity still comes into the mix. So here's my image. So this is, drew it on a piece of paper, chicken scratch, took a picture of it. Now I'm going to go back to my version of Adobe Firefly, and I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you what we're going to do next. So I'm going to upload that image as a reference structure. So this is what currently Adobe's done this. Firefly's done what it wants to do based on the prompt itself. It's its own interpretation of what I asked for. But in mine said I had three mountaintops, some snow looking on top, a moon, stars, a river, and a different structure. So now I'm going to hit generate. So now it's taking the reference style, this pink purple hue version, my prompt, a house at the bottom of a mountain next to a river, trees in a distance. And it's going to now take my reference structure, and now it's going to create new content. So now look, we have a different set of stars. We have a mountaintops with snow. This is, again, interpretation of my chicken scratch image now being interpreted as a reference image to how it can bring this to life. And I think as we think about creativity, and you think about brands, and you think about all the different marketers of the world that want to be able to do more, this ability to do structure and style and prompting unlocks a whole new world for creativity. So I'm excited about what Adobe's doing here. And as we think about this now being baked into, and I'm pretty sure it's already being baked into Adobe Express, which is the Canva marketer tool that's available out there. Photoshop's really high end, Illustrator's really high end for designers that are trained and the ones that are really doing the magic of creativity. But for those that want to do more creative things, faster, smoother, maybe more not as trained to the eye, like this is the tools that they're giving us. And I'm actually pretty impressed that this is like really keeping to that idea of what, if we look at this, and then if we go back to look at what I shared, um, it does offer, some idea of like, wow, that actually, it took my style, Three Mountains River, and it brought it back to life, which I find fascinating. So for Firefly to be able to do that and present this as now custom models, super exciting from a marketer's perspective. So kudos to Adobe for bringing that to life, in the Firefly story. Firefly Services is really the narrative around the enterprise world, API. So now taking this at scale, they showed this a demo of this with Coca-Cola's brand, and some product placement and some product design. So they have a picture of a bottle and how they're going to apply it to different references, and using style and using reference images. Like, it just did it. Like, how do you take 400 images and give it your brand style against it? And that's where the power of the Firefly Services is going to come into play. So that is actually really, really powerful from a ability for marketers and departments. Firefly going into scale. I really can't say, like, Adobe did a good job of bringing the Firefly story to life. And the custom models, again, bringing into Express and having those brand styles deployed to marketers who aren't using Photoshop, but still giving your serious designers the ability to have these things baked into their tools, was what Adobe was really trying to tell a story around. So when I think of Firefly, it is now getting the steroids that I think I predicted. It's going to give marketers and creatives the ability to keep brands on style, but also give their marketers the ability to create and interpret, and not have to always go back to maybe a design department to execute campaigns. I think this is really Adobe is doing the smart move, where you think of things like OpenAI and DALL-E and some of the other Stable Diffusion and Midjourney that are out there, where you really have to have more technical expertise to bring these things into your world as a marketing organization. Adobe's got it right there. And I think that is smart play, one of the only groups that can really do it. But they're leaning into what they do best, which is enabling marketers to do more. And so I really appreciate what they're doing with this. And again, even as a marketer and a creative, quasi creative, I now can do more with this without too much difficulty. As you think about the Firefly family, it's even going to extend even further. So really, to date, Adobe Firefly has really only been about images. And it's going to continue to be about images, but Adobe in itself is more than images. It is powering the major movie productions. It is taking things into video and audio and 3D modeling. So, the image here is like, yes, we have Firefly Image 2 model. We have the ability to do vector modeling. We have Firefly Design Model. These are all available today. And what's coming down the pipe here in the summer and fall is going to be Firefly Audio, Firefly Video, and Firefly 3D modeling. And clearly leaning right into where they do best, which is creativity. Now, the one that isn't here, I was really hoping to hear something about Firefly Text or some other text some text kind of generative AI feature and functionality. That wasn't announced. That was probably one of the ones I didn't think was actually going to make it, because Adobe really has leaned into this commercially available out of the gate, and we know that they've been training all of their models on their own content. The hard thing is going to be, how do they bring it to life? How they bring it to life with text, and that's a harder thing for them to grab. So Tad Reeves is here. Thanks, Tad, for joining. The Firefly for the 8th story was a lot more compelling, honestly, than Gen Studio story. We're going to get to Gen Studio. As a technical person, I totally understand what you're talking about. Gen Studio, we'll talk about, Adobe's like typical thing where they're going to talk about something and doesn't really release it until later in the year. But especially given the language around how those Gen Studio gives capabilities, but is not going to be released for 2 quarters at the earliest. Yes, that's every big major technology company. And we'll actually have that as a theme later, Tad, but you're absolutely right. That currently today, the API and the Firefly models that are available today are more compelling. You're correct. Gen Studio, their next tool that brings the AI things in the world, is going to be a little more challenging to swallow now, but it's going to hopefully unlock a lot more later. And as a marketer, I get more excited about it. I know you're on the technical side, the API side, and some of the other stuff is a little more on your world. But I also think that you'll appreciate Gen Studio when it becomes available as well. So Firefly, great, set of capabilities, great set of areas. Again, text not there yet, but I think it's going to be baked in different ways. But it's still one of those weird things. You can't get to personalization at scale without text content, but you're certainly going to get there when it comes to the ability to deliver video, audio, and images faster at scale for deployments, it's going to just compress and shrink that time from ideation to execution. So let's talk about what else did I see in the mix here. Oh, and I guess I'll lastly say is like, this is how you're actually seeing this all come to life. They're baking this whole thing into, Creative Cloud for Enterprise, which is where the APIs are coming in, the Firefly services, more API, and then Adobe Express, which is, again, this more mid-tier, but I don't know if it's called mid-tier. It's actually a really powerful tool in of itself, but is really giving marketers the tools at their fingertips without having to go to the big design shops to maybe design teams to execute some of this stuff. Will this be recorded and available for replay? It will be recorded. It's actually being recorded right now, and will be available here and on my YouTube channel after the fact. So, but thanks for joining, Alora. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about here? I have a few more things we want to talk about. All right, so Firefly, great stuff. Now, what's the next thing that was really kind of talked about? And I think it comes down into things like data. So real-time CDP was a big talk about discussion. And I think it comes in the larger area of, comes as a component of the larger themes of what Adobe set out right out of the gate from the conference, which is this idea of customer experience management in the era of AI. And in the era of AI, now it comes down to where Adobe's big things are content, data, journeys, personalization, ecosystems, efficiency, and trust. They didn't really talk about trust that much, but I think it's really implied in this whole idea that their content models are all being available for commercially viable out of the gate. Certainly, we talked a little bit about efficiencies. Ecosystems is where this comes into, especially also with the data. So real-time CDP has always been something about the data that you're pulling in from other sources. And there's always been connectors and APIs to make that happen. But what Adobe announced that I think a lot of people in the audience, it didn't really get a lot of claps, but it should have, was this idea of the federated audience composition, which is getting your data from AWS or Microsoft, Azure, Google Cloud, but also Databricks and Snowflake, and being able to then take that information, ingest it, do stuff with your audiences and segments inside CDP, and then also be able to talk it back out to advertisers and publishers. And so that collaboration layer that they're now adding into the mix, this federated audience composition, but I think is unlocking much more potential for thinking about your actual 360-degree profiles, what you're looking at as far as your audience, how you can look at segmentation and maybe more real-time segmentation. We're going to talk about that here in a second with the AI component. But this was an announcement that I don't think got enough claps at the end of the day. Ironically, not a lot of claps throughout the entire session, but this one did come up. I think it was maybe underrated on what it could actually bring to the table. We'll see how it comes out and play. I would really like to have a digest with our director of our VP of data platforms, but this seems to be I think it's going to be a lot bigger when it comes to where Adobe plays in the space of data management and audience management as well. Let's see. I want to get into this next one, which is the next big announcement that I heard that got me excited as a marketer was this idea of the AEP, or Adobe Experience Platform AI Assistant. The AI Assistant, as a marketer, one of the things you want to do is you want to be able to create segments, you want to be able to execute, and you want to be able to make sure you're trying to deliver as fast and as relevant as possible. At Bounteous, we're really thinking about things like omni-channel to omni-relevant, how to become relevant in the channels you want to get to, how do you test that out ahead of time? I think this AI Assistant is where we're going to start to see this co-pilot idea, is we're going to see all the major platforms doing it. Salesforce does this with Einstein. They're now calling Einstein GPT. They want to ask it questions like, find me a micro segment on, moms that are dog lovers that live in suburban city areas, and just being able to deliver on that, segmentation in real time. This is where, as a marketer, I want to know some of these things and ask it questions and then get answers. So what the AI assistant is really starting to think about giving you that ability: ask questions, automate tasks, simulate outcomes, generate audiences and journeys, and then deploy it. And that was a big discussion. I don't have all the screenshots here that I took, but it actually walked through like a whole journey of asking it through a GPT chat interface. And that was super fascinating to me as a marketer, because right now that's all paper. It's all, other forms and conversations, and maybe going to ask your database admin for, can you find me a segment on XYZ? How do you do that more real time? This is where they're doing it now with this AI assistant. Now, how much is it real now, and how much is it going to be, later released? is to be determined. But I do think that, again, talking to your data, talking to your segment, talking to your places where you can find your audiences and the things that matter to them in questions, it's going to introduce a whole new world of how we think about creating segmentation, creating messaging, creating marketing, and then being able to execute against that. And that's also where then Gen Studio comes into play, which is then um, being able to ask those questions, create the workflow around it. How do you actually make that whole campaign come to life? This AI assistant baked into things like real-time CDP and Workfront and the other platforms is where we're going to see this manifest itself. That is like the big kind of topics that I saw. Gen Studio is really an interesting feature and function. I saw a little bit of this last year. I was in Atlanta with Bounties, did an event with Adobe, and Jennifer Quain was there from Adobe. We were talking about Gen Studio and AI, and she showed a demo. And it's anything that I think that to Tad's point of view and early on is this idea that Adobe likes to talk about things before they're actually like really ready for prime time. And one could argue AEP was exactly that. It was delivered and talked about, but then it went through a 5-year evolution of things that have worked and didn't work. Now it kind of has its home and knows what it's supposed to be and knows how it's going to manifest itself and bring itself to life. I would say, Gen Studio is that next product, right? It's how do I take this idea of AI? How do I take this idea of interactions in a chat interface to be able to create campaigns faster, from creating the brief, defining my segment, to testing ideas, to understanding what the performance predictability is going to be through some predictive modeling, and then deploying in a way that can optimize and test and optimize along the way. That is what the crux of what Gen Studio is going to be able to deliver in the future. As Tad kind of highlighted, it's a 2-quarter probably still thing. I think we're going to see it in the fall. I'm sure there's companies that are experimenting with right now. The demos look great. But being able to say, I'm looking for a specific segment, or identify who is doing XYZ types of actions and create micro segments, where this whole, I think next year, when it comes to AI in general, is while there's AI and generative AI that most companies are trying to figure out and how to activate and get ROI out of, platform companies like Adobe, Salesforce, Braze, Iterable, Segment. I mean, talk about every CDP platform, every email, multi-channel platform, big DXP platforms. How are they baking the AI into their solutions themselves is where they're going to see 2024 really get moving, and then ramping into 2025, where it's now, how can I not live without having AI in my workflows and solutions and products that I'm using today? This is the year I think Adobe really makes this come to life. And hopefully Gen Studio delivers on the promise of what it is articulating. It's articulating faster efficiency. It's articulating creativity and exploration. It's articulating and promising this idea of test and learn before you deploy, predictive modeling, and then execution and optimization. That is exciting for marketers, especially at an enterprise level, when you have the multiple Adobe solutions in place to be able to deliver on that. But everybody's going to be running for the same spot. I could see this in CDP vendors. I can see this in loyalty vendors. I can see this coming to life in email vendors. I can see this coming to life in multi-channel commerce. They're all looking to do the same thing. The question is, who's going to be able to bake it together in a way that, when you're in a composable or a multi-solution environment versus an ecosystem environment like Adobe has, it'll be interesting to see how it comes out and how smooth it comes out. I think this is where a lot of consultancies and system integrators are going to really be able to lean into, if they can learn how these solutions are using AI and how they can interact with each other, either through middleware or workflow solutions or other tools. That is what companies are looking for. How do I get more out of my teams? How do I get more out of deploying? How do I get closer to one-to-one? We're still one-to-segment marketing. I have a whole other live stream I'll do on why we're still talking about personalization 10 years later, and why we'll probably still be talking about personalization at scale in the next 10 years. But this is getting closer to one-to-one. One-to-many is still our segmentation we do today. I really hope that Adobe solutions and other platforms as well are getting us better to be the personalization we really want and need at the scale, in the medium, in the channel that matters the most, and when we need it. So I think Adobe's doing a lot of great things, but again, it's their conference. You're drinking the Kool-Aid. You're drinking from the fire hose. It's certainly something that you have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt until it becomes real, or until you're really willing to buy it, because all these things are going to come with a cost. We have to remember that too. Adobe's in the business of making money. They are in the business of having subscriptions, and how do they continue to add value to that subscription, but at the same time, giving marketers, the ability to do what they need to do, still making money by doing it. Let's talk about my hits and misses from Adobe Summit, my predictions. I did not hear as much about Adobe this is what I used last time. Adobe takes on composability and headless. While they talked about edge delivery services and some of the other things that Adobe Experience Cloud, Experience Cloud and Experience Manager are doing, they really didn't hit composability and headless on the nose as I thought they might during the big kind of product keynote session. A little disappointed in that. They are considered a big monolith in an ecosystem, but at the same time, they could have leaned in there a little bit more. They didn't. Maybe I just wasn't hearing the right buzzwords, but they didn't lean in there. So I think that was a miss on my part. I did predict that AI was going to be all over this thing from a conference perspective. I think I hit that one on the head. Another one that I did not hear was Adobe Commerce. I didn't hear about Adobe Commerce at all. We had some great sessions that were out there. There's definitely educational sessions that were talking about Adobe Commerce, but nothing in the keynotes. And I was really surprised not to hear Adobe Commerce get some love, especially when it could have easily, right? It could have easily said, look, we got product description ability with generative AI. We have some ability to do this again, all the Firefly solution that we just talked about. How does that get ingested into a commerce information, part of a PIM, part of a commerce solution? That wasn't talked about either. So you can kind of see where it could have gone, but it didn't go. So I was really surprised to not hear commerce come into play as well. I wish they would have, but they didn't. So a little bit of a miss there. And the last thing that I did not predict correctly, and maybe this was a stretch by my sense, out of the gate, was, Figma fell apart. That Figma acquisition. We talked about text generation, Gen AI, and that is kind of somewhat talked about behind the scenes, but not like big announcement. And there certainly wasn't an announcement about some partnership in the Gen AI space with a large language model like OpenAI, which I would not have predicted, but maybe a Cohere or Inflection or one of the other ones that are out there. And didn't hear that either. And again, maybe it was a long shot guess that it could have happened or not, but it did not. Not super surprised. Again, going back to this idea of the trust and what the Adobe models bring to the table, they are very adamant on this commercially ready, viable products that you can do. You can create something in Adobe Firefly and should be able to use it publicly in a commercial setting and not get sued because of the way it's been trained. So it certainly did not win on my 5 predictions. 3 of them were kind of a bust. I would say, as I reflect back on what the week was and what was kind of talked about with the discussions that we had in our booth and just what people's challenges were, I think where Adobe continues to struggle a little bit is that it's their complex tools, right? Their technology is always going to advance what marketers are able to do. And they need a lot of, marketers still want to make sure they're getting the best use of their investment. And some of it comes back to the basics, right? How do you continue to look at content in an effective manner? And content supply is still a big challenge for marketers. I'm not sure everyone's going to buy the entire Adobe ecosystem to fix their content supply challenges. But I do think how marketing organizations and companies are thinking about their content supply needs is a very real challenge today. So whether you're using Workfront or some other workflow tool that can integrate with Creative Cloud or whatever your creative tools are to then get into approvals and other processes to actually get it deployed and optimized, whether through Adobe solutions, that's a real challenge today and will continue to be a real challenge. Adobe does have an ecosystem that answers for it, but a lot of companies don't and won't own the entire Adobe ecosystem. So they're going to have to figure out how to build their own content supply chain that uses some Adobe tools and some not of Adobe's tools. So we'll see how that continues to go and grow. But that is a real challenge for marketers and will continue to be for a while. The other kind of thing that that I would say discussion is that, maturity. I do think one of the things that Adobe's still continue to do is they are, for better, I don't want to say for better or for worse, but I would say Adobe's doing what it can to mature marketing organizations to be better. Their products are maturing, right? So the customer journey analytics, customer Adobe Journey Optimizer, and real time CDP are their homegrown solutions. These are not acquired solutions by some other means, and organizations are gravitating to it. I think they've got their digital many organizations have their digital foundation done. Website, analytics, some level of personalization. But those that want to advance a little further, um, is getting into this now where AJO, CJA, not supposed to use, I think, not supposed to be using the acronyms anymore. Journey Optimizer, Customer Journey Analytics, and Real Time CDP is where they're maturing into. That's where I think we're finally getting into like that next level of maturity, and it's good. I think companies are getting it. They're getting, and it's good for them. It's good for business. They want to make sure they're delivering the right content to the right person at the right time that makes them want to feel that engagement with the brands they care about, maybe get to a point of an emotional loyalty, and then deliver growth for them. And really, I have a product and service, and I have a customer that wants it, and how to make sure that connection happens in the most effective and efficient way possible. And Adobe solutions are continuing to do that. So I do think the maturity part is there. They're going to continue to evolve their tools, and they're clearly leaning into the AI thing, which is making them and allowing them to create more tools instead of buy tools to do it. And I do think Adobe's smart in that arena. So Tad comes in here one more time, Mr. Reeves, and if you want to, you should actually check out Tad's YouTube channel, and I'll link it in the comments and in my notes for this one. He had a during kind of like in a post evaluation on a more technical sense of what his thoughts were in Adobe Summit. You should go check that out. I did take a look at it beforehand. I decided not to go the big technical route that he did, but Tad's been in the ecosystem of Adobe for years, and you should go check out his technical review of what the products were doing. So Tad's sharing, so potentially a hit or miss, Adobe not giving the public go-to-market strategy fully articulated with respect to integrating edge delivery and dynamic media. I agree. These are two areas that, if you're not familiar, Edge Delivery is our new version of Adobe Experience Manager, trying to deliver faster, more efficiently, and effectively with their tools. I'm not going to go into all the details of how it all works because Tad will have a better answer than I will. And then dynamic media being, I think, back to how DAM is a DAM related solution and how they could, marketers can do more with that more dynamically. They kind of like felt like they're moving a little more to like this content hub idea. Kind of hard to explain, so I'm not going to get into it, but yeah, those are probably still two misses because those are two products that were been talked about for a while, but didn't really get that true level of, here's what we're bringing it to market and bear. Still confusion. You're right. I mean, I think they clearly want to lean into the ones that they can say were easy targets, and that's all the AI stuff that they were talking about, Tad. The last thing I'll say about the takeaways, Adobe continues to get a lot of things right, but they also continue to talk about things and hype it up before they're really ready to go. Gen Studio being one of them. Firefly, they talked about the great things they could deploy, but here's 3 things that aren't going to come until later. And right now, LLMs and all this Gen AI stuff is moving at the speed of the next day. We've seen large language models announced in the last 2 weeks. There was even a lot of chatter last week with other LLMs being announced. Databricks, which is one of the integration partners, announced their own open source large language model, which could play really interesting into that connectivity into real-time CDP. It just continues to evolve. And as you think about what the products are, maybe Adobe's maybe slow rolling a little bit this so they can get it right. But I think they also need to kind of get it out there sooner, faster. Maybe as a big company, they can't afford to be as iterative as other companies can be. But certainly waiting months when you see a new thing come out almost feels like every week in the Gen AI space. Marketers are going to start to explore those other solutions and how they can bake it into their workflows and processes while they wait for maybe Adobe solution to be at parity, if not better, and hopefully better than what's being currently deployed today. So that is a little bit of a challenge I think they're going to run into as they think about where they deploy their Gen AI solutions in the ecosystem of the Adobe platforms. I would say overall, it was a great week. I think a lot of people got a lot of great information out of being there. They're certainly not doing Adobe Summit in EMEA this year. So we had a lot more international audience this year, which was great to see as well. But it was a great event overall. I always enjoyed going there. As I said, friends, family, feels like it's coming home. This was my 10th Adobe Summit, my 8th in person. And we'll be back again next year as well, if all things, go well. So I really, if you have other comments you want to kind of drop in, feel free to do so. I really appreciate the idea of being able to come and share my thoughts with all of you today on a Friday. I think that about wraps up my day. I'm going to try and do these maybe a little more. We'll see what happens. I say that every time and then, work. But in any case, thanks for taking your Friday with me to hear about my thoughts on Adobe Summit. Adobe's doing the right things. They're doing the right things in the right way. I just wish it'd be faster. But at the end of the day, they're a big enterprise platform. And, when you're enterprise, you can't do them as fast as maybe some others are. But they certainly are in the right direction. And they're using, in my opinion, when you lean into the idea of creativity for all, that comes from content creation. It comes from image creation. It comes from any creativity, video, audio, all the things that come into a creative aspect. And then how do you take it through the entire ecosystem from an idea to deployment to optimization? They are still the only tool that can do it from end to end, in my opinion. And that's why I really like what they do. Anyways, we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks for joining. Peace.